the Congress really needs to take control of their responsibility again and pass budgets. Ideally, a comprehensive budget, I think, would be important. Maybe move away from this 12 bills sort of situation that I think maybe back in the day seemed like a good idea. But now it's a matter of why don't we have the Senate come up with a budget, the House come up with a budget, and then work its way out. Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. Well, today I've got a lot to go through, so let's sit back, relax, enjoy it. Remember, you can find this wherever you get all your podcasts, all the major platforms it's on. You can get the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com and check out my website too at vanceginn.com, where you can request my services to speak, to do research, to do media, a lot of other things that are out there. So don't miss that as well. So what I really want to talk to you today about is kind of a fiscal policy 101, what's happening in DC, what states should be looking at, and so much more. You know, the budget deficit is already surging this year. It's nearly reached $1 trillion just in the first 5 months of the fiscal year after hitting $1.8 trillion last year. We've got a national debt exceeding $36 trillion, $1 trillion net interest on the debt. I mean, this is just unsustainable. It's an insolvent sort of situation, just rolling over debt with new debt. We had the Federal Reserve that met last week, and basically they said, look, we're not going to change our interest rate pattern of having expansionary or contractionary sort of measures. But at the same time, they reduced how much they were reducing the rate with which, I should say, how much they're reducing their balance sheet from $35 trillion to $5 trillion. It's not $1 billion, I should say. Billions, trillions, it all adds up, right? But I think that's a major concern because that can creates more inflationary pressures throughout the economy whenever there's already a lot that's going on. They've got a lot to deal with, of course, with the tariffs and the uncertainty that that's creating across the economy, the potential for a decline in economic output in the first quarter, which I think is a combination of the bad policies during the last 4 years of a fragile economy in the Biden administration. And now we see the uncertainty from the tariffs under the trade administration, or the Trump administration, I should say. But overall, why does the fiscal policy, why does the federal spending really matter? So that's really what I want to get in today. Number one, deficits crisis hurts Americans. Well, look, the principles of this is that the federal government's $36 trillion in debt isn't just a financial issue. It's a direct threat to economic freedom and prosperity for all of us. Every dollar borrowed by the federal government takes from both us and future generations, limiting growth and innovation and investments and everything else. Excessive government spending drives debt and inflationary pressures. If the Fed prints the money, right, then that puts too much money chasing too few goods, we get more inflation. All this negatively impacts individuals and businesses. My solution here is that the first thing we should do is acknowledge the problem. Kind of like if you're alcoholic and anonymous, right? You got to acknowledge that you have a problem. I think that's the first step to dealing with this overspending problem, which is driven by all this extra funding that's going out there. And with this extra money that's happening and the extra spending, it's also creating dependency in the private sector, whether it be individuals or businesses or something else. It props up things and it just distorts. It redistributes income across the economy. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a Keynesian economist. I don't believe that government spending stimulates growth. I also not a supply side economist because I don't think tax cuts necessarily pay for themselves. You need a combination of those things. Incentives matter, of course, but there are things that you could deal with that. And we've gotten this idea that more government spending is always the case. We have this budget inertia is what I call it over time. We've got to commit to solving this problem and seek fiscal discipline instead of these short-term potential quote-unquote gains. We need to look at the longer-term implications from this. I talked about this recently in my piece at EconLib. Reducing spending can empower Americans. Don't miss that. I'll put that in the show notes page. All right. Number two, let's spend within our means. The principles of this is that the American families understand the importance of living within a budget. You and I do that every month. I do it on a spreadsheet. My wife and I use You Need a Budget, YNAB, to kind of go through and check it off. It's kind of like the Dave Ramsey method, but the 21st century method of that. Instead of putting money in envelopes for specific expenditures, you put it into an app. And then anytime that you make transactions, it removes how much money is in that particular quote unquote envelope. And it's a great way to use it. I like using it anyway. But what we think about though is that we've got to work hard to stay within our credit limits and protect ourselves for financial future shocks and everything else in our own lives. And the government should be doing that as well. They should be good stewards of taxpayer money by prudent budgeting. That means improving your budget process. That means passing sustainable budgets where there's a spending limit that caps hopefully all spending, no matter what it is. But at least if you're a state, you're capping all state funds, you exclude the federal funds. But of course, at the end of the day, legislators have complete discretion over the budget. It's just that a lot of times the political will isn't there, so they'll call it mandatory spending or entitlements or something else. But we're not entitled to any of this, okay? It's all coming at a huge cost. And so whenever you cap that amount of spending, you limit it to some sort of historical average of population growth plus inflation, which is a good measure of the average taxpayer's ability to pay for government spending. And you return any of the surplus, the over-collected taxpayer dollars, back to taxpayers by reducing tax rates. Okay. This provides budget benefits. The spending limits allows for more transparency, predictable caps on expenditures. It also aligns government spending with the average taxpayer's ability to pay to make sure that the economy is growing. If you have more economic growth and you have spending restraint, we could be in a much better situation fiscally. And that states also, right, have been leading the way in demonstrating success, especially Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Now, I think it's a proven model. It's the kind of the gold standard. If you talk to a lot of folks about the types of spending limits that should be out there, it caps most of the budget, or at least it did in 1992 when it was created. It's been watered down over time, but it's also based on population growth plus inflation, and it even includes state and local spending underneath the limit, which I think is important for all states to consider, because a lot of the local governments, even if you're doing a good job at the state level, the local governments are out of control. So I think it really should be a cap on both of them. But whenever you're looking at this, you also need to think about reducing tax rates, right? And so it's a great way to connect the rate reductions by having more spending restraint. And putting those incentives in place, I think, is really helpful when talking about the fiscal sort of situation, whether at the local, state, or the federal level. In a related resource that I have, I explain how Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights model could be adopted at the federal level in my recent piece at the National Review, and how it could also be used as a method at the federal level as well. Number 3, the real threat is spending, not shutdowns. Critics often use the fear of a government shutdown to push through reckless spending bills and just throwing everything, throwing the Christmas tree at it, if you will. But let's be honest. Politicians have already shut down schools, economies, and entire communities in recent years. In contrast, a temporary federal government shutdown might be the best solution. It would force a necessary confrontation with the root cause of our fiscal issues, Congress's addiction to deficit spending. We have a spending problem, folks, not a revenue problem. If we look at the share of GDP, I've talked about this many times, but it's around 70% of GDP is a historical average for tax receipts. Whether we have higher tax rates or lower tax rates or whatever we're taxing, it's about that, because you can only get so much taken out of the economy, right, before it slows down or something else happens or people avoid it. But spending has been closer to 20% of GDP. That delta, that 3 percentage points, is the deficits that we've had over the last 50 to 60 years, and it's created this massive problem that we have today. My solution is that we got to end the continuing resolutions. We need Congress to actually do their job and pass a budget. The number one thing that most states have to do constitutionally is pass a budget. Why don't we have that at the federal level as well? We got to get away from this idea that we're just going to pass continuing resolutions and have budget inertia forever into the future, and give more and more power to the executive branch and the president to do what they want to do and regulate things like they want to regulate through bureaucrats. The Congress really needs to take control of their responsibility again and pass budgets. Ideally, a comprehensive budget, I think, would be important. Maybe move away from this 12 bills sort of situation that I think maybe back in the day seemed like a good idea. But now it's a matter of, why don't we have the Senate come up with a budget, the House come up with a budget, and then work its way out? That might be a better position to move forward with. Shutdowns could also help thinking about what we should spend our money on and what we should not. And don't settle for less. We've got to avoid these conflicts. Balanced budgets are achievable. With economic growth and a commitment to spending restraint, we can do this. All right. Related resources here is my commentary of the daily economy at American Institute for Economic Research. I explore the dangers of avoiding government shutdowns at the expense of fiscal discipline during a late budget battle last year. Don't miss that one. I'll put in the show notes, as you know. Number 4, examine major spending areas. The greatest national threat remains Congress's reckless spending. We know that, which is primarily driven by so-called, quote-unquote, entitlement programs. These programs need urgent reform through market-based solutions. States are increasingly dependent on federal funds, and the more they rely on Washington, the less control they have over their own policies. Medicaid in particular is a major driver of this dependency, receiving $616 billion in federal funding in 2023 across the states. This is over half of the federal funds allocated to states. My solution here is that we need to assess where the money goes, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, net interest payments on the debt. All these things start adding up in a hurry, even national defense. There should be no sacred cows when we're thinking about the budget because we're overspending massively, costing taxpayers in the process. And we need to set priorities. Just like I talked about recently in Kansas, in Topeka, Kansas, I went to the Capitol and testified on how to improve their budget process before the Committee on Government Efficiency, their COGE instead of the DOGE. And I talked about how there should be priority-based budgeting, where you base it on a performance on where these issues are that are meeting the goals that are out there, but also using zero-based budgeting at the end of the day too, where you start from scratch and work your way up. You have responsible budgeting or sustainable budget limits. You look at efficiency audits and other things. We need to be doing this also at the federal level. Speaking of those efficiency audits, we need to cut waste like the DOGE is doing with Elon Musk. I mean, I know that some of this won't add up to be a lot, but if you look at the Export-Import Bank, that should end. The Jones Act, which should end. Excessive occupational licenses, most of that's at state level. These could reduce waste and cronyism and create a better situation at all. And we need welfare reform. We need to have block grants to states so that way we can reduce the cost at the federal level and have more flexibility and more empowerment to states in our system of federalism. Because remember, one size does not fit all. Look, I have a commentary in the Daily Economy discussing the states relying on federal funds and areas of reform for social safety nets. Don't miss that one. Number 5, sustainable budgeting for the states. Sustainable budgeting and fiscal responsibility are crucial, not only for the federal government, but also for state governments and local governments. While the federal government can run deficits, issue bonds, print money, states are bound by strict budget balances or balanced budget requirements and often face tax and expenditure limits. This requires a disciplined budgeting approach at the state level to maintain fiscal stability and foster long-term economic growth. Look, I think that we need to plan better and have strong spending limits with the taxpayers' money because remember, this is the taxpayer money. States should reduce their dependence on federal funds because if they don't, when the fiscal crisis hits at the federal level, then they're going to have a huge wake-up call given how much money is going to come out of their pocket. Because remember, the federal funds are also just another money coming out of another one of our pockets. There's too many pockets. They're taking all the money around, and it's a tough situation. And any surpluses that states or local governments should have should be to lower tax rates. You know, whether it's income taxes or something else, we've really got to get taxes lower and get away from bad taxes and more towards consumption-based taxes instead. And you need budget reviews and prioritization, as I mentioned before as well. I've got a good piece at Club for Growth that many of you have seen called Sustainable Budgeting, a Pro-Growth Blueprint for Fiscal Responsibility in the States that basically shares a lot of the key data that we're working on with the Americans for Tax Reform Sustainable Budget Project that you can find at atr.org/budget project. But it goes through each state and it compares the state spending to population growth plus inflation. And most states are well above it. Okay, so there's a lot of key reforms that need to be done. I'll be updating that website very soon as well. So with all this stuff that's going on, the key part that I want you to understand is that spending matters. And whether it's your budget or the state or the local or the federal budget, this is all money that's coming out of the productive private sector. And for us to be able to live our life and let people prosper, we need more money in our pockets and more things to do, whether it's risk or reward or failure or success, however you want to look at it. But this is really where we need to be heading overall. And I'm concerned by the amount of spending that's going on by Democrats and Republicans. Maybe libertarians need to come out and start voicing these things more as well. But we've really got to get this under control or our country won't be as strong and we'll be in a much worse situation overall. But I'm not going to let us get there because I'm going to keep working on this. I hope you will too. Look, thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com. And even get greater value with a paid subscription or a complimentary subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. That's all I got for you today. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.